In a sleepy coastal town, where the sea whispered secrets to the sand and time seemed to move at a more patient pace, lived a woman who never asked for much. Grace Oben was the kind of woman people easily overlooked, not because she lacked beauty, but because she never flaunted it. With calloused hands from years of running her late mother's bakery and a heart stitched together with silent dreams, Grace had never known luxury. Her world was warm bread, quiet evenings, and unpaid bills. But when a mysterious man arrived in town with eyes that held storms and a bank account that could buy the entire village twice over, everything changed. Damien Holt wasn't born rich. He earned every dollar with blood, sweat, and secrets. He had a past cloaked in shadows, a present filled with privilege, and a future he thought he had under control, until Grace stumbled into it with flour on her face and innocence in her voice. She married him for money. He married her for convenience. But what they didn't know was that destiny had a twisted plot neither could predict. Beneath the layers of false promises and hidden motives, something fragile and dangerous began to bloom, a love neither of them wanted but desperately needed. But love, as they'd soon discover, wasn't free. As we dive deeper into the heart of the story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments section below. And remember to turn on the notification bell, so you're the first to know whenever we release new content. Grace doesn't believe in fairy tales. Damien doesn't believe in people. Their marriage begins as a transaction. Grace agrees to the deal to pay off her bakery debts and secure a future for herself and her younger brother. Damien chooses her because she's exactly the type of woman who wouldn't get emotionally attached, or so he thinks. But emotional boundaries blur. Grace's simple kindness disarms Damien. His hidden gentleness awakens feelings in her she thought long buried. Still, both are bound by unspoken rules. No expectations, no love, and no truth. External conflict. Damien's former flame, Vanessa, poised, manipulative, and still bitter, returns to reclaim what she believes is hers, threatening Grace's place in Damien's world. Internal conflict. Grace is torn between the comfort of financial security and the pain of falling for a man she believes could never love her back. Damien wrestles with guilt and fear, guilt from his past choices, fear of being vulnerable. First meeting. Grace spills coffee on Damien at her bakery. He's curt. She's unimpressed. But he returns the next day, and the next, drawn to something he can't define. The proposal. Damien offers her a marriage contract, cold, precise. Grace laughs in his face, then considers it. After her bakery faces foreclosure and her brother's scholarship is in jeopardy, she accepts. The wedding, quiet, private, without affection. Grace wears a simple dress. Damien wears a guarded expression. They don't kiss. Unexpected kindness. Damien notices Grace feeding stray animals behind the estate. He starts joining her without saying a word. One day, he brings her a handmade birdhouse, carved with her mother's name. The betrayal. Grace overhears a conversation between Damien and his lawyer discussing the inheritance clause. She realizes the marriage was never about her. The departure. Grace leaves, returning to her bakery and filing for annulment. Damien lets her go, but begins to unravel. The reveal. Vanessa leaks a scandal tying Damien to a controversial land acquisition that almost cost innocent farmers their homes. Grace, despite everything, defends him publicly, citing his recent charitable work in the town. The reconciliation. Damien shows up at the bakery one rainy night, drenched and broken. He tells Grace the whole truth, not just about the will, but about his fears, his failures, and the poem he wrote about her. The real marriage. They marry again, this time, no contract. Just vows and a kiss. Their relationship is a dance of proximity and distance. At first, they orbit each other carefully. Grace is wary of trusting another man with her heart. Damien struggles to express affection, convinced that showing weakness means losing power. But through shared silence, small kindnesses, and fierce arguments, their walls crack. Grace begins to realize that money didn't buy her happiness, but the marriage bought her a chance to heal. Damien discovers that vulnerability doesn't destroy, it connects. They confront childhood wounds, Damien's abandonment and Grace's loss. They slowly learn to speak each other's language, hers of feeling, his of action. One night, after Grace burns a tray of croissants, Damien helps her start over. He kneads dough with clumsy hands, flour streaking his face. They bake until dawn. That morning, he calls her by her full name for the first time. She almost cries. Then, like a thunderclap in sunshine, Vanessa arrives. Sleek, poised, and venomous, she steps into their world with one goal, to reclaim Damien. She mocks Grace, calling her the charity wife and reminds Damien of the empire they once ruled together. Grace holds her ground, but doubts creep in. She begins to wonder if Damien still harbors feelings for Vanessa. Worse, she wonders if Vanessa was the one he truly loved. Tensions rise. Grace distances herself emotionally. She stops joining Damien in the stables, skips meals, locks her door at night. Damien notices, and for the first time, panics. Then comes the betrayal. Grace stumbles upon a forgotten letter, one written by Damien's lawyer, thanking him for choosing a suitable candidate in time to retain the estate. The language is cold, calculated. It reopens wounds Grace thought were healing. She packs her bags, leaves a note. You bought my presence, not my soul. In taking it back, she returns to her bakery, battered but determined. The townspeople gossip. Her brother worries. Damien stays away. Damien isolates himself. Vanessa tries to fill the void, but he shuts her out. He visits Uncle Jim, who mistakes him for his younger self and says, "You found her, didn't you? The girl with the flower hands. Don't let her go, boy." "Not like I did." The words haunt him. A storm hits the coastal town weeks later, destroying several homes and the community center. Damien arrives unannounced with crews, supplies, and funds. He works alongside locals, shoulder to shoulder, not as a billionaire, but as a man trying to make amends. Grace sees him, soaked and dirty, handing out blankets. When she approaches, he doesn't smile. He just says, "I couldn't fix what I broke between us, but maybe I can fix this." That night, he returns to the bakery, offers her a folder. Inside, annulment papers, unsigned. "I wanted to give you a way out," he says. "But I also wrote this." He hands her a notebook. Inside, poems. All about her. Her laugh. Her strength. The smell of cinnamon. The way she made his world feel warm for the first time. "I married you to save my estate, but you saved me." Grace reads his poems for hours. She cries, not because of pain, but because for the first time, the man she fell for was speaking her language. She finds him the next morning by the sea, on the same bench where their journey began. "I don't want the money," she tells him. "I know," he replies. "I want the man who wrote about my bread like it was gold." He smiles. This time, they kiss. The days following their reunion are fragile and tender. Grace and Damien take cautious steps back into each other's lives. No grand gestures, no declarations. Just slow mornings, shared coffee, and quiet laughter. The annulment papers remain unsigned, tucked away like a memory neither wants to erase nor revive. Grace returns to the estate, not as a guest, not as a contract-bound wife, but as herself. She turns the greenhouse into a community garden. Damien funds a local scholarship in Uncle Jim's name. Slowly, they rebuild, individually and together. But life has one more storm to weather. Uncle Jim's health declines rapidly. One morning, Damien finds him sitting in the garden, staring at the sunrise. He doesn't respond. He's gone. The funeral is small, intimate. Grace holds Damien's hand through it all. In his eulogy, Damien shares how Jim taught him that real wealth was not counted in numbers, but in the people who shaped your soul. Grace weeps for the man who had unknowingly been her greatest ally. Weeks later, Grace receives a letter addressed to her from Uncle Jim, found among his things. In it, he reveals he was the one who amended the will to include the pure of heart clause, not out of bitterness or control, but hope. He had met Grace years ago, when she delivered pastries to the care home he volunteered at. Her kindness, he wrote, had stayed with him. "I hoped you'd find each other," he wrote. "And maybe in pretending, you'd remember how to believe in love." Grace clutches the letter to her chest. She doesn't tell Damien right away. Some truths are better cherished in silence. One misty morning, Damien leads Grace to a part of the estate she's never seen. Nestled in a grove is a small stone cottage, half-built, rustic, cozy. "It was meant to be a guest house," he says. "But I thought it could be ours instead. Something small, simple, like the way you make life feel." He doesn't get down on one knee. He doesn't need to. "I don't want a second wedding," Grace says softly. "I want the first real one." So they marry again, this time with bare feet on damp grass, wildflowers in her hair, the scent of bread and cinnamon in the air. Her brother officiates. The town gathers. Even Vanessa, from a distance, watches, expression unreadable, then turns and walks away for good. Grace and Damien start anew. No secrets, no contracts, just a love born of mistakes, redemption, and resilience. The bakery thrives with Damien's silent investments. The community garden becomes a sanctuary. Damien learns to ride without fear, Grace learns to trust without retreating. And on quiet nights, as they lie together in the stone cottage, he reads her poems. He's still too shy to speak aloud. She married him for money, yes. But what she got instead was everything she didn't know she needed: a partner, a place to belong, and a love story built not on riches, but on truth. Months after their heartfelt re-wedding, Grace and Damien settle into their quiet rhythm. The community garden thrives, children laugh in its meadows, and Grace's bakery has become a beloved town fixture. Damien finally begins to feel something he thought lost: peace. But peace never lasts long. A letter arrives, no return address, typed, cold. It reads, "Not everything buried stays dead. Ask your husband about Project Haven." Grace is rattled. She doesn't mention it immediately to Damien, hoping it's a mistake. But when a second letter comes, this time with an old photo of Damien, standing beside a frail boy and a man in a military uniform, her heart pounds with doubt. One evening, over a quiet dinner, Grace lays the letters on the table. Damien's face pales. He says nothing for several long seconds. Then, he begins to speak, slowly, heavily. Years ago, before he inherited his uncle's estate, he worked with a classified humanitarian relief project in Eastern Europe. What started as aid soon became political. Lines blurred. Mistakes were made. He left it all behind, haunted and changed. Project Haven, he whispers, was the reason I stopped trusting myself with people. Grace doesn't ask more that night. She just holds his hand. Days later, a woman arrives in town, Mara. Elegant, poised, and familiar with Damien in ways that make Grace's heart twist. Mara claims to be a journalist, researching old relief missions. But her real purpose becomes clear fast: she wants revenge. Her brother, the frail boy in the photo, died in an explosion that Damien had tried, but failed, to stop. She blames him. And worse, she knows about Grace's initial motivation for marrying him. "Tell me," Mara whispers during a confrontation, "does he know you were in debt up to your ears and saw him as your lifeline?" Grace slaps her. But the damage is done. That night, Grace confesses everything: the financial struggles, the desperation, the hope to escape her past. She never thought she'd fall in love. Damien listens, silent. He doesn't walk away, but he doesn't speak either. In the days that follow, a cold distance grows between them. Not hatred, just hurts. Grace considers leaving. The bakery feels too small. The cottage is too quiet. She even writes a letter to Damien, explaining that maybe they were both just two broken people pretending to be whole. But she doesn't leave it on his desk. Not yet. Meanwhile, Damien quietly starts investigating Mara's claims. He finds inconsistencies in her story, documents forged, timelines manipulated. The tragedy she blames him for turns out it was orchestrated by a corrupt official she never exposed. He confronts Mara publicly, at the town library, where she's giving a talk on war journalism. Grace arrives just in time to see him dismantle her lies with calm precision, and the final blow: a recording of her accepting hush money from the very regime she blamed. The town is shocked. Mara flees. That night, Damien returns to the cottage. Grace stands at the window, watching the rain. "She wanted to break us," he says. "She almost did," Grace admits. "But we didn't let her." They cry, then laugh, then hold each other for hours, saying little, just breathing together. The storm has passed. They decide to do something radical: open a center for healing, not just a garden. For veterans, for survivors, for those who, like them, carry invisible scars. Grace writes her story anonymously. It becomes a blog that gains attention. Readers from around the world share their own stories of marrying for the wrong reasons and finding something better than what they hoped for. Weeks pass since Mara's departure, and life slowly resumes its gentle rhythm. Grace's bakery receives heartwarming letters from blog readers, and Damien quietly works on architectural plans for the healing center. But underneath the surface, unease simmers. Grace begins to notice Damien's late-night walks stretching longer. He's distant, often staring at the fireplace with furrowed brows. One evening, while folding laundry, she finds a scrap of paper in his pocket: coordinates, scribbled hastily, with the name Anatoly. A name Damien never mentioned before. Meanwhile, a new volunteer joins the garden project: a charming, soft-spoken man named Elias. Grace is wary, but he earns everyone's trust quickly, even charming the children with stories of faraway lands. But something about him doesn't sit right. One day, Grace finds Elias snooping in the cottage's study. He claims to be looking for old garden plans, but he leaves too quickly, too nervously. She starts digging. Grace finds Damien's laptop open one afternoon. A folder labeled Anatoly is password protected. Her fingers hover over the keys but she stops. Instead, she confronts Damien that evening. At first, he denies knowledge of Anatoly. Then, reluctantly, he confesses, Anatoly was a friend. A spy. He saved my life when Project Haven went south. But I thought he died. Those coordinates. They're where his voice was last heard. Grace's heart pounds. Are you going there? I have to, he replies. If he's alive he could be in danger because of me. Grace faces a dilemma. Go with him to a foreign, hostile place, or stay and protect what they've built. Before she can decide, someone breaks into the cottage. Files are stolen. Elias disappears. They now know, Elias was connected to Mara. The threat isn't over. Grace makes her choice. I'm coming with you. Grace and Damien travel to a remote eastern village. There, they pose as relief workers. The locals are cautious, tight-lipped. But in a crumbling church, Grace finds a drawing of Damien and Anatoly as younger men. Someone remembers them. A woman, elderly and nearly blind, whispers, the one who limped. He was taken. Soldiers. Last spring. Their search becomes frantic. They follow vague leads through snow-covered trails and finally, a tip points to an abandoned estate in the woods. The estate is too quiet. They enter, hearts pounding. And then, a gunshot. Damien is grazed. Grace drags him behind a pillar. Shouts echo. It's not just one man, they've walked into a trap. Elias appears. You should have stayed in your fairy tale cottage, he sneers. Project Haven destroyed lives. Now it's your turn. But help comes from an unexpected place. Anatoly, alive but weathered, and leading a group of rebels who'd been tracking Elias. A fierce gunfight breaks out. In the chaos, Elias tries to escape, but Grace, calm, deliberate, blocks his path and knocks him out with a fallen beam. They escape, bruised but alive. In safety, Anatoly reveals the truth. Mara and Elias were part of a network trying to restart Project Haven under a new name. Damien's refusal had made him a target. Anatoly had been protecting him from the shadows for years. Back at the cottage, Grace and Damien find it untouched like waving arms. The townspeople greet them like heroes. The healing center opens within a month, dedicated to Anatoly's courage. Grace and Damien return home with Anatoly. The healing center's grand opening brings light to the village, but in the backdrop, something darker brews. Anatoly, still recovering from his injuries, warns that not all of Mara and Elias's allies have been found. Damien, though weary, takes up the mantle of vigilance again. Grace, however, notices the toll it's taking on him. He becomes withdrawn, spending long hours in the garden's greenhouse, which he's turned into a makeshift lab. One night, Grace discovers a torn letter in the trash bin. It's addressed to someone named L, and it ends with, I had no choice. The next day, a stranger arrives at the bakery, a poised woman with fiery red hair and a cane. She introduces herself as Leora, a botanist from Austria interested in collaborating on herbal therapies. Grace welcomes her cautiously, but Anatoly's face pales when he sees her. Later that night, he confesses, Leora wasn't just a botanist. She was one of Project Haven's designers. But she vanished before the collapse. Leora isn't here by chance. She claims to have abandoned Project Haven when she saw its true purpose. Now, she brings a warning, a shadow operation named Vortex is raising its goal, to manipulate healing centers into data farms for psychological warfare. Grace and Damien are stunned. They'd built their center on transparency and healing. Now, it risks being used against people. Damien confronts her. Why now? Why us? Leora hesitates. Because I helped design the framework that Vortex is using. And I know they'll come for this center next. As tensions rise, Grace wrestles with doubt. Was everything they built destined to be corrupted? Damien, for the first time, voices his fear, maybe love can't survive a world like this. Grace refuses to accept that. She begins recording a video diary for the townspeople, an archive of their purpose, to preserve the truth. Then, the unthinkable happens. One of their own, Callan, a quiet gardener who had become like family, goes missing. His fingerprints are found in the server room. Files are deleted. Security footage is wiped. Anatoly believes Callan was compromised. Leora suggests something worse: he was never truly one of you. Grace finds a map in Callan's old notebook marked routes leading from the village to a private port. They rush to the harbor at dawn. On the pier, they find Callan loading a small boat with hard drives and equipment. He's shocked to see Grace. "You don't understand," he pleads. "They have my sister. I had to." But Damien cuts in. "You had a choice. You always did." Gunshots crack in the distance. Agents from Vortex close in. In the chaos, Callan chooses redemption. He sabotages the engine, buys them time to escape, but he's captured in the process.